Hello, my name is Dr. Michael Batu, and today we're going to talk about utility and marginal utility. So before we get to marginal utility, let's talk about utility. What do we mean by utility? So utility is the satisfaction that a consumer receives from a good or service. So think of it this way. It's like your level of happiness in consuming a good or service. And of course, the idea is that the more we consume of a good, the higher utility we receive. So in economics, we measure utility in terms of a concept called util or utils. So utils, it's a number that we attach to our level of satisfaction. And again, same idea, the more the good we consume, the higher our level of utility is. So in the next part, what I'm going to show you is that a table where we have information on the number of goods and the number of goods consumed and the associated utility for each of these goods. All right, so here's the table. And what we see here is that the more units that this consumer consumes, from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, this individual gets a higher level of utility. But there's something that you need to notice here, is that although utility is increasing, what happens is that the rate at which utility increases becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. This is explained by what we call diminishing marginal utility. So let me add here a column on marginal utility. So how do we compute marginal utility? Marginal utility is, so let me first define this concept. So marginal utility is the additional satisfaction from consuming an additional good or service. Okay? And how do we compute marginal utility? So we call this MU. It's simply the change in total utility over the change in the number of units. So let's go back to our table. So the marginal utility for 10, since there's no units before that, so let's say it's 10. But here we can compute marginal utility for the second unit. So we see that the change in total utility is 18 minus 10 is 8, divided by the change in the number of units, which is 1. So here we write 8. Similarly, 23 minus 18, which is your change in total utility, divided by your change in the number of units. You have 3 minus 2, you have 1. So it's going to be 23 minus 18 divided by 3 minus 2. And what you get here is 5. And we can repeat the same exercise for the rest of these goods. So what we see here is something important. As we increase the number of units, we see that marginal utility starts at 10 and it starts to decrease until we hit 0. So in other words, if this individual will consume the 6th unit, there's no more additional utility for this person. So in other words, we see what we call diminishing marginal utility. Now let's translate this information by way of a graph, and I'm going to sketch it here. Here, what I did was for each dot, it corresponds to each combination of units and total utility. And so what we have here is a collection of these dots. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect the dots. And what we can see here clearly is that although total utility increases, the increases in total utility become smaller and smaller and smaller as we consume more of these goods. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to sketch marginal utility directly underneath this total utility graph. All right, so what I have here is our graph on marginal utility. And just like what we did here for total utility, what I did was I have these dots which correspond to each combination of units and marginal utility in this table. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect these dots. And what you see here again very clearly is that marginal utility decreases as we consume more of this good. So our conclusion here is this, that as you consume more of these goods, okay, for this particular consumer that exhibit this kind of preferences, what we observe is that marginal utility decreases. So how can we apply this in the real world? Well, you know for a fact that I like fried chicken, but I also like milkshakes. And if I have my first milkshake, I will be very, very happy with it. I will drink it. I'm all for it. But then if I have my second milkshake, my third milkshake, I will feel bad. Like I said, you know what, I don't want it anymore. Until the very, let's say 5th or 6th milkshake, I'm not too happy with it anymore. So that's how it works in the real world. So I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope you learned something today. Thank you for watching.